Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Unfound Now. I am Unfound's host, Ed Densel. As the title suggests, I will be covering the disappearance of Beau Mann. That is two words, Beau, and his last name is Mann, Mann. He disappeared on November 30th, so approximately 2 months ago, from the Studio City area of Los Angeles, California. Before I get into the details and the learning points for this particular video, I want to remind you to give this video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to this channel if you are not yet a subscriber at this time. And please hit that little bell button that will alert you, that will cause the alert to happen when we upload videos such as this one. We conduct Unfound Now for two primary reasons. I talk about this every episode, but I realize new people are tuning into the channel all the time. Number one, of course, is publicity for whatever disappearance that is being covered. On the regular Friday episodes of Unfound, I only cover what we would call older disappearances. Disappearances that are over a year old. Whereas on Unfound Now, and I've been doing this for about a year and a half now, gives me the opportunity to give publicity to more recent disappearances. So disappearances that have happened within the last few months of whatever episode I'm doing at this time. So for Beau Mann's, this episode is coming out at the end of January of 2022, and he went missing about 2 months ago, which I think is about the average length of time between a disappearance happening and the Unfound Now episode. So once again, number one reason is publicity for these newer disappearances. And number two is education. Anybody who follows Unfound, or if you're just a new follower, new listener, new viewer, you're going to find this out very quickly. I'm all about education. I've gone to a couple universities so far. At the end of 2021, speaking to criminology students about missing persons cases. What's going on in the 21st century is how they are investigated, what's working, what's not, different examples of disappearances, different kinds of disappearances, and how they get solved, why they don't get solved. And so number two, for these Unfound Nows, it's the same thing, education. This gives you an opportunity to hear me talk about how I look at a particular disappearance and what sticks out to me when I read all the articles that are out there, just like any of you might. And for any of these disappearances that I've covered on Unfound Now, I don't know any more about them than any of you do. So once again, number one reason is publicity, getting the coverage, getting the word out there, and number two is education. So what are the learning points? What is the education for the disappearance of Beau Mann? Well, number one that I'll be talking about later, all 3 points I'll be talking about later in this episode after we go to the map. Number one is keep your head on a swivel. Number two, never take anything for granted when you read or hear about a disappearance. And number three, something that I think is so important, disappearances are about people. Even though we talk about times and dates and everything else, they eventually come down to the people involved. So I'm now going to go to the map. We're going to go to the place where Beau was last seen. We're going to look at the area a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about Beau and what was going on in his life. And then I'm going to come back to all of you. You'll see me again, and I will go through those 3 points in much more depth. Okay, everyone, please bear with me. I am here in Pennsylvania, and I packed a lot of my equipment to do these programs, the Friday episodes, etc., with me. But one thing I was not able to bring is my tripod. So I'm holding the phone, the camera, with my right hand. I'm going to be pointing out some things with my left hand. So I apologize for the shakiness of this. I will do my best. But what you are looking at in the middle of the screen, that the prominent red dot, is the location, the 7-Eleven where Beau was last seen. That is 11007 Ventura Boulevard, Studio City, California. As a coincidence, I'm very familiar with this area. I have an ex-girlfriend, although we're still friends. We talk often. She lives over in this area right here, and I believe has done so for many, many years. And she does work in entertainment. And this is a very entertainment-oriented area. Warner Brothers Studios is near here, Burbank. A lot of agencies, talent agencies, are in this area. Special effects offices, where they do, of course, all the big movies, animation, etc., are in this area. There's certainly crime there. There's certainly homeless people there. But when I think of this area, Studio City, I mean, it's the name, Studio City. This is what I remember about it. A lot of fun things to do. There's a really cool bowling alley near there on Ventura Boulevard. There's a couple hotels that I stayed at down this area. It has a very interesting, even though it's a big city, has a very kind of almost small town feel to it in some ways. In contrast, if you were to go over to the mountain to Sunset Boulevard and elsewhere, where then it really feels really, really LA and Rodeo Drive, etc. So that is the 7-Eleven where he was last seen. Now I'm going to change this over to a satellite view just to show you a few things. You'll see that even though this is in a city, you'll notice these mountains are right there. Now, people live in these mountains. In fact, there are some very fancy houses up in this area. Many well-known Hollywood stars have lived up here. Laurel Canyon, Coldwater Canyon Road, very common, and has been like this for years and years and years and years. But I think what I'm saying is that I realize the popular belief, the story is that he got in an Uber and texted 911 from it. But as I will be stating when we get back to the 3 points, the 3 learning points for Beau's disappearance, that sometimes we just can't take these things for granted. And so what I see is a 7-Eleven right up against these mountains. And although people live in these mountains, you would not want to go hiking in these mountains. These mountains are probably a little bigger than you might imagine. In fact, I will zoom out a little bit. And it's right there in the LA area, but I'm telling you, you would not want to go hiking in those mountains. I'm not saying necessarily you could get lost, but it certainly could be dangerous. So something else we want to look at, and we'll go back to the other view so you can see it better, is that we do have, and allow me to zoom in, this is tough. You'll notice that there is this river right here. This is not really a river. If you've seen the movie Terminator 2 with Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, the second one, not the first one, the second one where he's the good guy. Sorry to ruin that for anybody. But you'll remember there was that big chase with him on his Harley and the cab of an 18-wheeler. I think maybe it was a tow truck 18-wheeler. The chase, that's what it's really like. It is meant for water, they're canals, but this is not what you would call a river. And I don't know if anybody could actually drown in any of these canals that run through LA. They certainly are made to possibly get deep under really, extreme circumstances. But you would not associate any of these canals, I think, with anybody necessarily drowning. So although it may look like a river in the picture, it's really not. Now, this does bring up, some additional questions about this area. about Studio City. Now, I tried to find where Beau is living in LA. I was unsuccessful. I gave it a good hour of trying to use some databases, and I even went to, and sometimes I do use web sleuths for these Unfound Nows just to see what people are saying. No writing anywhere, no proof anywhere of where Beau was living at the time. However, I've heard that he did have an apartment somewhere and even had a car, but I could not find that address. But I get the feeling from the people talking there and the news, some of these news articles, that he did not live in the immediate area of this 7-Eleven. He lived somewhere else. You should also understand some other things. That in one of the articles, it says that he got picked up at the airport the day before and an assistant drove him to his office. I don't know where that is either. It sounds maybe it's the same place where he was living, in his office, same place. The issue, though, is he was using a post office box for the business, and the address that is registered when he registered as a business in California is City Hall. So I'm not sure where he was sleeping at night. I think that would be helpful to understand this disappearance a little better. It makes total sense that he got into an Uber and was heading home. Or where is home? How far of a ride is it? Should also even go even further, that nobody knows what he was doing in Studio City either. Because I get the feeling that's not where he works, that's not where he lived. And I will tell you, when you run into these situations where you're now 2 months into a disappearance and seemingly family and friends don't even know what he was doing in this area, it's usually a bad sign. It just is. It is a very well-known point about disappearances. When you see people in areas where nobody can explain why they were there, usually it means something's going on. I think we also can say that it's been 2 months. Nobody in the Studio City area has come forward to say, oh yeah, Beau was down seeing me that day. This is a bad sign. But it seems, though, that he had his computers. Obviously, it seems to me he was going somewhere to work or was working in this area. Nobody's come forward to talk about that. I think we need to think about that a lot. And then we take it to the next step of, well, if he did take an Uber, and trust me, by this time, I know it's been a little while, trust me, we're 2 months in, the police have checked Uber already. Trust me, I have a lot, I can be critical as the police as anybody out there. They've surely checked it by now to see if he actually got in an Uber, Lyft, rideshare service of any kind. But nothing's been made public. And in fact, of those 911 texts that were sent, we only know a little partial part of them. We don't know. We just know that he says he was in an Uber. Well, what else was he saying? Did he say anything else? Did he give the description of the car? Did he say where the person was? Did he say where he was when he was texting? We don't know about any of that. And what I would say is, if that information was not included, then I would say that I have a doubt whether he was really in an Uber at all. I'm just going to say it. But if we are to believe that he was in an Uber, and looking at this map, and it was approximately 9 minutes between him being seen on video and the first text, could have gone a lot of places. Of course, if he was going the surface streets, that would really limit the distance that he was in the car. But if he got on the 5, the 101, the 405, could have gone a long way. Could have. He could have been miles away before he realized what was going on. The question is, would it take somebody that long to realize something bad was happening? That the person got into what he thought was an Uber, and it was some sort of scam, or the Uber driver was just doing something he or she shouldn't have been doing. Would it take that long? You have to ask that for yourself. You'll have to think about that on your own. So this is the map where he was. We don't know why he was in Studio City. I personally, even though I looked for it, don't know where he was living. I don't know why, if he had a car, why he was using Uber in the first place. So a lot of questions here that maybe are not obvious to the average person, but they are obvious to me. So I'm going to take you back, and I'll now get into the 3 learning points for this particular episode. And we are back. Before I get into the 3 learning points that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I want to remind you that I hope you will consider becoming a Patreon supporter. Patreon.com/Unfound podcast. You know we do a lot at Unfound, and I really do try to limit the amount of advertising and things that can, I guess, sometimes pollute what we're trying to do as true crime podcasters. I know we have some advertising here on YouTube, but if you, of course, are a very dedicated follower of the audio program that comes out every Friday, you know that those episodes never have any ads. That is on purpose. So we rely on other means to raise money to keep this program going. So I hope you will consider becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/Unfound podcast. We also take donations at paypal.me/Unfound podcast. And I hope you will also consider tuning into the live show that I've been doing, for over 4 years now, where I answer a lot of your questions. I talk about a lot of true crime news. And then you also have an opportunity during the live show on Wednesday nights to contribute using the Super Chat button. So I hope you will consider supporting Unfound. So let's go. I'm going to just move my screen over here. I do not do these Unfound nows off the top of my head. I have a computer right behind this screen here where I have my notes. And if you're wondering what's going on in the background, if you don't know, I am up here in Pennsylvania seeing my father probably for the entire month of February. And I got here about a week ago, like on about January 20th, something like that. So I'm here at, I guess you might call it the Northern Headquarters. And I take all my equipment with me, and that's how the episodes continue to get produced. So here are the teaching points, once again, to remind you of the ones that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. Number 1, head on a swivel. Keep your head on a swivel. Number 2, never take anything for granted on a disappearance. And number 3, disappearances are about people. So let's talk about number 1. Keep your head on a swivel. It's kind of become a little bit of a kind of a funny phrase that popped up a few years ago. I forget how it even came up, but I know that I got it from the sports world, and it usually has to do with football when, receiver's going downfield or across the middle. He needs to keep his head on his swivel so he doesn't get hit hard, or maybe a defender needs to keep his head on a swivel so he doesn't get blocked, like blindsided, something like that. It is also relevant in our daily lives because all of us can be victims at any time, whether it's in our home, at work, at a convenience store, walking out of a Walmart to our car. We have to be aware of our surroundings. And it's even more pertinent now in the 21st century because what are we all doing? We have our eyes down on our phones to the point that we know of people who've walked out into traffic, not realizing they're not on the sidewalk, getting hit by cars, getting killed by cars, onto railroad tracks. These things now happen in the 21st century because we're all caught up in our phones. How is this relevant to Beau's disappearance? Well, as I talked about in the map section, when he was at this convenience store, he had this backpack, and seemingly the computer equipment he was carrying fell out of it. And anytime that happens where you display valuable things to others, who knows who is watching? Who knows? And so when that happened, Beau should have been, once he looked around to see, did anybody really notice this? Did I just possibly become a victim? If I walk out of this convenience store, is somebody going to be following me because they want to rip me off, take my computers, take this backpack and take off and sell them on Craigslist or eBay or something? And who knows what might be on those computers that could be valuable, maybe banking information that really could put Beau in a jam. So if you find yourself in the same situation where something happens, you drop your purse, your wallet, and everything falls out of it, and there are people around, as you're gathering all that up, you should also be looking around at the same time. And I will tell you, we have at least 3 disappearances that I've covered on Unfound since in the last 5 years, where people were certainly attacked, and there was evidence of that. Number one, I think probably the most well-known one is Jodi Huisentrude. She was leaving her apartment. She was a newscaster in Mason City, Iowa. She was walking to her car, and certainly somebody attacked her. How do we know? Because all of the stuff she was carrying was strewn all over the parking lot. Now, should a person leaving their apartment at 4 in the morning, suspect or expect that they are going to get attacked? Probably not. But you never know. And so it's always good to be aware of your surroundings. And what that means, keeping your head on a swivel, is you're always doing this. Back and forth, looking around. And I know I do that. I'm 51. I think a lot of people know that I'm a concealed carry holder, so I carry a gun on me. So even when I go to the Publix, grocery store, Starbucks, trivia night, whatever, when I'm walking from my car into the building, from the building out to my car, I'm always looking around. And I would not say that I'm a person who looks like an easy mark either, but I still do it. Another one is Brenda Condon. She was a bartender. And certainly there were signs, although not as obvious as Jodi's, that it seems that she was abducted too. She was at her place of work. She was by herself. And I believe there's reason to believe that she was abducted and taken away from that bar against her will. Then number 3, another I think very good example is Julie Weflin, a woman who was working for a power company in Washington, the state of Washington. And she went out to a remote location and she didn't check in. They went out to see what was going on and they found her helmet on the ground. Her car was parked at like this transformer building place, and she had obviously been attacked. So we've covered disappearances like this, and you have to be aware of your surroundings. So this is what I think about, the main point I think about regarding Beau's disappearance. We have proof that he dropped some things that might have caught somebody's attention. And so then as he's walking down the street, and I know we'll get to, I already talked about the Uber situation, maybe somebody got him and got his phone and tried to make it look like he was in an Uber when he wasn't. And it was all started in that convenience store. So we have to think about that. All right, number 2, never take anything for granted. I guess this might take us in the opposite direction. There are too many disappearances that I've covered, and we're on about number 240, I think, this week, or maybe next week, that where missing people said that they were going to be doing one thing or going somewhere, and that is not what ended up happening. We so badly want to believe that missing people, if they're on their phone or texting, are telling the truth about where they are, where they're going. There's just enough evidence to show that many times they are lying, just outright. And I have some examples. I'm going to talk about those, and then we'll get back to draw a compare and contrast with Beau's disappearance. Tyler North. He was at his sister's. He told her he was leaving. He was going to go straight home. That was not the situation. What we found out later is he was texting with his ex-wife, and she lured him to a local park for sex. And then the charges are, and this is a trial, I guess it will be happening in 2022, that his ex-wife and her boyfriend killed Tyler. He said he was going one place, instead he was going somewhere else. Craig Freer, a disappearance in New York, he said he got caught skipping work, and he said he was headed home, he would be going home. He did not go home. There's no proof that he ever headed in that direction. In fact, his car was found in the apartment complex where he took that call. Crystal Morrison. And we've covered 3 disappearances like this. Crystal Morrison's, Deborah Bowman's, Kevin Newen's, all 3 people who called for rides. Now, Crystal's was at work. Deborah was at a hospital. Kevin was at a bar. All of them 3 called for rides, and when those rides saying, yeah, I need a ride home, and when those people showed up to pick them up, these people weren't there. They said they wanted a ride home, but were not there when the ride showed up. It's hard to understand. I could have never suspected that this would be a thing in disappearances, but it certainly is. You get to 3 disappearances like that, you start to realize there's something going on here. Now, Crystal Morrison's, we know that something was going on with her. She was sick. She might have suffered some heat stroke, didn't realize what she was doing. But Deborah's and Kevin's are still unsolved. So we're still not sure what happened. So the reason I bring this up is that we must ask. It is not a for sure that Beau really did take that Uber. And it's just like I said in learning point number 1, I don't know if there's any proof that he was the person who sent these texts to 911 from his phone. It was him from his phone. It might have been totally someone else. It might have been an attacker. Who knows? But I don't know if there is enough evidence to believe this Uber story, that he texted 911 saying he was in an Uber. We should not take that for granted at all, just because it came from his phone. And it very well could be that he did send that text and he was lying. Just like some of these people I just gave the examples. They were lying. Now, the other thing we might think about is regarding never taking anything for granted. We must also then look at some of the facts to go along with what that person said he or she was doing. Still a little unclear about this bag of ice. There seems to be some belief out there that that information is not correct. Of course, I think of a bag of ice, these big bags of ice like this. You put them in a cooler, it can do all sorts of different things with them. But if that is what he had, then he was getting into an Uber with it and it would start melting. It's a little hard to understand, but like I said, I don't know if that particular fact is solid. But really, how far could he have, if it was true, how far could he have been going with a bag of ice? Not far, whether he was in an Uber or not. But if he wasn't going far, then why would he have needed the Uber? It's maybe a little bit of a paradox there. And then the other thing about never taking anything for granted and matching facts with what the missing person said is the timing. And as I have written in my notes, it took 7 minutes. He got in the car at a particular time, but it was like 9 minutes before these texts started going to 911. So did it take that long for him to figure out that something wasn't right? It seems like somebody would figure that out a lot more quickly than that. If he did get it, if it was a scam Uber car, let's say, or maybe the Uber driver was drinking and driving or high or something, or was taking him on some wild ride or was threatening Beau or something like that, you'd think that that would have happened a lot faster than the amount of time between him being seen on the video, the time frame, and then that first text to 911. So we have to think about the timing when we start thinking about, was he in the car, and before we really start taking for granted that, yes, this is actually what happened. Very important. And I should say, for full disclosure, at the beginning of 2021, so like over a year ago, I had a horrible Lyft ride back from the Tampa airport to where I live in Clearwater Beach, where I was scared for a moment, and I don't scare easy. But I got picked up by a guy who was obviously taking me on a ride, forgive the pun. And I think it was a Lyft driver, but it was some sort of long ride scam so he could get more money out of the ride. And I ended up being reimbursed for most of that trip after I complained to Lyft. So I know a little bit about getting into a car. If Beau got into a car and something happened, I know a little bit about that myself. So it does happen. And I'm sure many of you, if you've ever done Uber or Lyft, maybe you have some stories as well. Of course, none of you went missing, so we have to think about that. And number 3, the third learning point is disappearances are about people. And the more disappearances that I cover, I learn that it's not just about that date, whether it's November 30th, 2021, or November 30th, 1978, or August 1st, 1970, which happens to be my birthday. Most disappearances start in the days and weeks and months before. I know it's hard for people to understand, but what I mean by that is that it's normally about the people. What is going on in that person's life? What choices are they making? Who are they hanging out with? Who are they married to? Do they have addictions? Everything that has probably been in their life for a long time, well before the disappearance date. So we have to look at Beau. He was a guy that did have some addictions in his life. It seems like he had some struggles. And then he started Sober Grid, which I think is a fantastic idea. Being that we talk about addiction a lot on Unfound, I can certainly relate to that. I've never had any of those issues, but some of my guests have. Their missing loved ones have. And I think that's great what he was doing. And it seems that it was going well. But I think we also have to think about sometimes with success, that brings pressure and stress. And we know those things can cause people to relapse into bad behavior that they might have had in the past. Stress is a major factor sometimes when people take on addictions, whether it has to do with a relationship, or maybe they have a bipolar disorder or depression. A lot of things can be put together, and then you add in stress, and they're beating everything, and then all of a sudden they go right back and start making bad choices again. So he was having a lot of success here. So that is something that comes to mind. And he might have been fighting it for a while. So when we look at Beau Mann, we just can't look at him on November 30th, 2021. We have to start going back and really try to understand the person. So I have some examples for this one. Eric Franks. His disappearance, which pretty much is foul play. He hasn't been found yet, but I think there's a lot of reasons to believe it was. His disappearance surely started the day he decided he was going to go to Michigan to get involved in his daughter's life. Well before what is the accepted disappearance date. Well before that. That is when that disappearance started. And then you have to look at everything leading up to that date. Everything in there. Austin Pivo. This is also a situation where, yes, he disappeared. He was murdered. His killers have been caught. They have been charged. They're going to jail. But yes, he disappeared on a particular date. But it's clear that whatever was going on between him and these other guys probably had been going on for a while. On top of the fact that these these 3 men who killed him, had this tendency. They probably had never killed anybody before, but maybe they just needed to be pushed the wrong way to do that. And that's what happened that day. So this was something that was leading up to that particular day where Austin went missing, and then his remains were found, and it was discovered that he had been murdered. And it should also be known, though, at least Austin himself, when it came out, what came out in the interview I did with his mother, he had had some problems with other people who were not involved with his disappearance at all. So I don't know exactly what was going on with him, but it does seem that he was, I don't know, there was something going on. He seemed to be having a lot of conflict in his life, even well before he went missing. Once again, we have to go back weeks and months and looking at these missing people, not just that day. And then I could mention Devon Bond, a young man who unfortunately went missing, and then his remains were found a couple years later, and he had committed suicide. He had taken the family's gun that was known at the time when he went missing, and he shot himself. And it took a few years before his remains were found not far from his house. But that is also a situation that there's no way that Devon Bond, just on that particular night, decided that he was going to kill himself. Certainly something was going on with Devon, and I don't think it started the day before or the week before, although there were stories about how he was interested in this girl, and the father, and maybe the mother too, would not let Devon see this girl anymore. That's something, but we've all maybe been in that situation in our lives, and we did not kill ourselves. So there must have been some other things going on with Devon, whether he talked about it with friends or family or not, that surely started with him well before the day he went missing. All right, so it's another example that disappearances are about people, what's going on in their lives, what's going on in their heads, the choices that they're making. Are they falling back into an addiction atmosphere? And we just can't look at the disappearance date. So in looking at Beau's, this is the same thing. We can look at what he was doing at that day and being at the convenience store and the computers falling out and these texts and everything, but most likely, if his disappearance is solved, whether he is alive or deceased, I think we're going to be able to say probably started well before that. And we could even attach that to even if he did become a mark at that convenience store because of the laptops dropping out. In that, was he accident prone? Did he not take care of his stuff well? Did he get into a situation where he just wasn't taking care of himself enough, and it just became a habit of making accidents, not looking around, seeing anybody if anybody was noticing, and just took for granted, well, I can make this mistake and nothing bad's going to happen. I can make this mistake and nothing's going to happen. Well, then he makes this mistake with his computers and something does happen. So that is my analysis of the disappearance of Beau Mann, Beau, last name Mann, who disappeared on November 30th from Studio City, California. Thank you for watching.